A group of children walked into school at the beginning of the year as usual, and without knowing it, had their futures quietly changed. Their teachers had been handed a list of names. These students, as they were told, were not ordinary. They had taken a special test, and the results showed something very unusual. Not that they were already the smartest children in the school, not that they had the highest grades, but something stranger. They were about to bloom. Their minds were supposedly ready for a sudden burst of growth. Their intelligence was expected to rise. Their confidence was expected to grow. 8 months later, that is exactly what happened. But the test was a lie. Their names had been picked at random. This is the Pygmalion Effect, one of the most unsettling experiments ever run inside a classroom. It asks a question that sounds harmless until you realize what it means. Can someone else's expectation change who you become? In the 1960s, a Harvard psychologist named Robert Rosenthal became obsessed with the invisible power of expectation. He had already seen something strange in a laboratory. Students were given rats to run through mazes. Some were told their rats were maze bright, specially bred to learn quickly. Others were told their rats were maze dull, expected to struggle. But there were no bright rats. There were no dull rats. Rosenthal did not think the rats understood the label. The rats had not heard the story. The humans had. The students who believed they had intelligent rats handled them more gently. They were more patient. They may have placed them in the maze more carefully, waited longer, tried again with more confidence. A false belief changed human behavior. Human behavior changed the result. That was the part Rosenthal could not leave alone. If expectation could change the way people treated rats, what could it do to children? So Rosenthal teamed up with Lenore Jacobson, an elementary school principal, and took the question into a real school. The study later became famous through their book Pygmalion in the Classroom. The school was disguised under the name Oak School, but the classrooms were real, the teachers were real, the children were real. Every ordinary moment now carried an extra variable, hidden in plain sight, what the adult expected to find. At the start of the year, students were given an intelligence test. Teachers were told it could predict which children were ready for a major academic growth spurt. The researchers called these students intellectual bloomers. Then they gave each teacher a list. Those names, the teachers were told, belonged to children who were likely to show unusual development during the year. The teachers did not know the truth. The list meant nothing. About 1 in 5 students had been randomly selected. The only thing placed inside the classroom was expectation. Nobody gave the bloomers extra lessons. Nobody gave them private tutors. Nobody told the children they had been selected. And none of the children knew they had been placed inside one of psychology's most famous self-fulfilling prophecies. The experiment had no wires, no cables, and no visible trap. Only belief itself, just a belief inside the teacher's mind. And for months, that belief moved quietly through the room. A teacher who believes a child is about to improve does not always notice what they are doing differently. They may pause longer after that child gives a weak answer. They may smile when the child tries. They may ask a harder question because they assume the child can reach it. They may explain the mistake instead of simply marking it wrong. They may see confusion as temporary. They may see failure as a step instead of a ceiling. The child may never know why the room feels different around them, but children are experts at reading adults. They know when a teacher has already given up. They know when a teacher expects trouble, and they know when someone is looking at them like something better is still possible. This is where the Pygmalion Effect begins. Not in magic, not in destiny, not in a speech. It begins in tone, patience, eye contact, feedback, and the number of chances a person gets before the world decides what they are. By the end of the school year, Rosenthal and Jacobson tested the students again. The children randomly labeled as bloomers showed greater gains than many of their classmates. The effect was especially strong among the youngest students. Some of the children who improved the most had never been special at the start. They became special because adults began acting like growth was expected from them. The label was fake. The consequences were real. When the study became known, it sounded almost too powerful. A teacher believes in a student and the student rises, but the darker reading is the one that stays with you. If high expectations can lift a child, low expectations can trap one. A student walks into a classroom and the teacher has already heard he is difficult. Another arrives with a reputation for being slow. Another is quiet for 2 weeks, and the room decides she has nothing to say. Nobody has to say the label out loud. The label leaks. It leaks through shorter answers. It leaks through less patience. It leaks through fewer chances. Then the child adapts to the role. The difficult student becomes defensive. The slow student stops volunteering. The quiet student speaks less. The teacher looks at the behavior and thinks, I was right. But they were not simply watching the future, they were helping build it. That is the disturbing center of the Pygmalion Effect. Expectation is not passive, it behaves. It changes the climate around a person. It decides how much warmth they receive, how much information they are given, how many chances they get, and what kind of feedback follows their mistakes. Rosenthal later described these channels clearly. There is climate, the emotional atmosphere around the person. There is input, the amount and quality of teaching they receive. There is opportunity, the chance to answer, try, practice, fail, and try again. And there is feedback, the way success and failure are explained. A teacher who expects more often gives more of all four. A boss who expects more may train someone better. A coach who expects more may correct mistakes with detail instead of irritation. A parent who expects growth may treat a bad day as temporary instead of proof of character. And over time, these tiny differences become a life. The effect does not mean belief can do anything. Rosenthal's study was later debated. Some pointed out that intelligence, family background, poverty, health, and opportunity cannot be erased by expectation alone. And that criticism matters, because the real lesson is not that belief is magic. The lesson is worse. Belief becomes behavior. Behavior becomes environment. Environment becomes the story a person learns about themselves. That is why the effect is strongest with children. Their identities are still wet cement. A child does not always know if they are good at reading, bad at maths, creative, careless, smart, lazy, difficult, gifted, or hopeless. They often learn who they are by watching how adults react to them. If the reaction says, "You can grow," the child may keep trying long enough to grow. If the reaction says, "This is all you are," the child may eventually stop fighting the label. The name Pygmalion comes from an old Greek myth. Pygmalion was a sculptor who carved a statue so beautiful that he fell in love with it. In the myth, the statue comes to life. Psychologists borrowed the name because the pattern is similar. Someone forms an image of what another person might be, then behaves toward them until the image starts becoming real. And the most frightening part is that it usually does not feel cruel. Most people do not think they are shaping anyone. They think they are simply responding to what is there. But the experiment showed the trap. Sometimes what is there is partly what we helped create. A random list went into a school. A set of names entered the minds of teachers. Nothing visible changed. No child was told they were chosen. No special class was created. No miracle was announced. But the room changed. The air around those children changed. And by the end, the numbers changed too. That is why the Pygmalion effect still matters. It is not only about teachers, it is about anyone who has power over the weather of another person's life. Parents, coaches, managers, friends, partners, anyone whose opinion can make someone feel larger or smaller. You can treat a mistake like evidence that someone is finished. Or you can treat it like proof they are still learning. You can look at a person and only see what they are today. Or you can behave as if there is still something inside them that has not arrived yet. That does not guarantee they will bloom, but it gives them better weather. The children in that classroom were not secretly gifted. They were not selected by destiny. They were selected by chance, then surrounded by the quiet behavior that comes when an adult expects growth. A false belief entered the room. A real future came out. And the question it leaves behind is uncomfortable. How many people are living smaller lives because someone expected less from them too early? And how many could still become something else if someone finally treated them like they were about to bloom?